The following information is from a naturopathic point of view. All information and views are intended for educational and informational purposes and do not replace the advice or care from your healthcare team. This is Tea Time with Dr. Danni, conversations for navigating holistic medicine and wellness. With your host, Dr. Danni, we provide a fun and insightful look at health and wellness with clear and concise information, helping you to make educated and empowered decisions about your healthcare options and your health. Now, here's your host, Dr. Danielle McDuff. Hello, my lovelies. Welcome back to our regular Tea Timers, and if this is your first time here, we're glad to have you with us. This is Season 1, Episode 3 of Tea Time with Dr. Danni. I'm your host, Dr. Danni. Grab your favorite cup of brew and join us in the parlor. Over the next 2 episodes, we will be discussing the importance of having an allopath on your health and wellness team with our guest, Dr. Harriet Lemberger Schor. Over these next 2 episodes, we'll be comparing and contrasting allopathy and naturopathy, discussing collaborative care, and giving you the top 5 reasons to see an allopath. Dr. Schor is also going to share with us some unique aspects of her practice. This conversation had so many gems and such a vast amount of information that we had to split that footage into 2 episodes. For our first-time listeners, I am a board-certified naturopathic doctor, direct entry midwife, author, and now podcast host. I've been in natural medicine since 2011 and began speaking and hosting live workshops on personal wellness and natural medicine that same year. This podcast is all about inspiring and educating our listeners to empower you to take the lead in your own health and wellness journey. Today's episode is sponsored by the upcoming collaborative retreat hosted by Dr. Harriet Lemberger Schor and myself on May 3rd, 2025 at the classroom located at 755 Boardman Canfield Road, Suite C2, bottom floor, in Boardman, Ohio, from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. This retreat will introduce you to the different aspects of collaborative care with breakout sessions on lifestyle medicine and vision setting, naturopathic medicine and nutrition, emotional healing and rebalancing, and the transcendence therapy, followed by activities and a cooking demo. A light breakfast will be provided, as well as lunch following the cooking demonstration. The cost for this retreat is just $65. Registration is open now, but seating is limited. Registration closes on April 25th. Call 330-758-9567 or text COLLAB RETREAT to 234-308-8289 to reserve your seat today. Did you know that the average time it takes an allopath to interrupt a patient while taking their history is 20 seconds? Just 20 seconds into telling your story, on average, a physician stops listening. On today's show, our guest, Dr. Harriet Lemberger Schor, is going to join our ongoing conversation on creating your health and wellness team by providing insights into patient care from an allopathic perspective. She's also going to discuss how the field has changed during her 35-year career as a family physician and share her top 5 reasons to seek allopathic help. Dr. Schor is board certified in family medicine and a fellow of the American Academy of Family Physicians. She's also board certified in lifestyle medicine and a certified life mastery life coach, as well as a transcendence facilitator. So grab your favorite cup of brew and settle in as we dive into this journey. Dr. Schor, welcome to the show, and thank you for spending your time with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Danni, very much for having me on your show today.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad you could make it. You wear a lot of hats in your practice, and I want to talk about all of them today, but I would really love to start with your allopathic practice. 35 years in family medicine. I am sure you've seen so many changes in your field during that time. Can you share with us how the field's different now from when you started, and maybe talk a little bit about the trends that you feel that maybe have improved outcomes, as well as some areas that maybe frustrate you a little bit and seem to have taken allopathic medicine back in regards to patient outcome and care?
Well, again, thank you. So in 35 years of family medicine, there have been tremendous changes. My observation is that many of the changes have been driven by the insurance industry. When I first started, sure, the insurance companies were involved in, the paying of the office visits and what have you. As time has gone on, and it's usually led by Medicare, and then everybody else follows the lead, is there's so much more dictated by the insurance companies. Everything from, what they will or won't cover to prior authorizations or pre-authorizations. This was not a thing when I first started in practice. Doctor ordered a test or the doctor ordered medication and it was done. Now, when I go to order things, it's not unusual to have to call the insurance company or go online, fill out these long forms basically justifying why this test is ordered and why this medication is ordered, and then wait to hear back from the insurance company to determine if they're going to cover it. And unfortunately, so much of the care that patients are getting is based on what is covered by the insurance.
Yeah, I hear that too. Actually, in naturopathy, that's probably one of the top complaints is that it's not covered by insurance. And what a lot of people don't understand is that the hoops that you have to jump through in order to, number one, get in network and then stay in network. It's really challenging, and it takes so much away from the time that you can spend in patient care.
Exactly. I mean, I'm blessed in my practice is that the overwhelming amount of pre-authorizations and prior authorizations, my medical assistant handles those. That's not the case in many, many practices. The physicians themselves or the nurse practitioners, they have to do that. It's very, very time consuming. When you're given 15 minutes per visit, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about that in a little while, in order to see the number of patients, in order to break even, maybe make a little bit of profit or what have you, the average family practitioner is seeing 25 plus patients a day. So in 15 minutes, first of all, that it's not realistic because, and we're going to get into the aspects of why 15-minute visits don't make sense as far as good patient care. And number two, it's exhausting. And then you tack on, at the end of the day, having to do prior authorizations, returning phone calls, finishing your notes, going through your in-basket. It's not unusual for a primary care physician to put in an additional 3 hours after they're done seeing patients. So if you figure a physician is scheduled from 9 to 5, they might get done seeing their last patient 5:30, 5:45, easily tack on 3 more hours to that. And that makes for, a 13, 14-hour day. So some of the other differences I've noticed is that with the greater hand that insurance has in the role of patient care, many practices now, the day of the private physician is, those folks are almost dinosaurs. So you have to be a part of some kind of a group to basically be able to get network contracts and network negotiations so that you as a physician can be covered and the services that you offer can be covered.
You mean with the insurance companies?
Uh-huh.
The insurance companies are willing to pay for it. Okay.
Yes. So what has been better as the insurance companies have gotten a greater hand in it, they've also set up some guidelines of targets or benchmarks with given medical conditions. So, for example, some of the benchmarks that we have to meet that are indeed insurance driven, for diabetics, they have to have a hemoglobin A1C of less than 8 to be considered well controlled. And 15% of your patients or more have hemoglobin A1Cs that are higher than that. They're not controlled, and that's kind of a blemish on your record, if you will, of the kind of good care that you give. Screenings for breast and colon cancer, hypertension monitoring. Those are just some examples of how the insurance company, now most of which has come from evidence-based medicine, and that's where there is science that's backing up that if you've got a hemoglobin A1C of 8% or less, that's considered to be decent control. So the science is there. The science is proven. But in order for patients to really get the care and to some extent a little bit of an incentive for the physician to provide the best care possible, you have to meet these targets and these benchmarks. So in a way, having these benchmarks, knowing exactly what you're shooting for, both in terms of numbers when it comes to hemoglobin A1C or blood pressure, and as well as like cancer screening, and knowing, okay, well, if you hit 70% of patients that are getting this, you're delivering good care for the most part.
That's interesting.
So a blessing in some respects, because it takes some of the guesswork out of am I really and truly delivering good care to my patients? The numbers start to speak for themselves. So the downside is that with a lot of insurance-driven impact, and I mentioned this at the beginning of this segment, is that the insurance companies dictate what's covered, what's not, who's in network, who's not, because people rely heavily on the insurance to pay for most things. If it's not covered, most patients then are not getting the tests done or they're not getting the medications. And we'll probably get into this a little bit more, is that sometimes I will say to patients, you need this test, whether the insurance company is willing to cover it or not. We'll do the best we can on our end to get pre-authorization, blah, blah, blah. If we can't complete that, and I'm really recommending the test, you may have to look at it as an investment and work out a financial assistance or a payment plan so that you can get this test done. And it may come out of pocket, but you weigh the risk-benefit ratio of doing it versus not.
Yeah, that's an interesting mindset. I'm glad that you brought that up. I mean, that's something that I hear as well on my end. People just don't want to come in because, oh, well, insurance doesn't cover it. Maybe 80, 90 years ago, maybe not even that long ago, insurance didn't pay physicians.
Right.
You came in, you paid your physician, and you submitted the invoice to the insurance, and they would reimburse you the portion that they wanted to reimburse you for it, right? Like the cost was the cost. And we've gotten now into this space, I think, particularly with patients. And I don't think that that's specific to allopathic, but I think it's more common there because you guys are typically the insurance receivers, right? Is that people now believe that, well, if my insurance doesn't cover it, I can't have it. Right. This idea that their health care is based on a small amount of money that they pay out of their paycheck to cover their premiums, and anything over and above that, they just can't do. And that's an interesting mindset in that it really changes the dynamic in how people approach their health.
And one thing that I desperately tried to educate patients is that if we could come up with a plan B, whether through a diagnostic or a treatment, an alternative that may be less expensive, less invasive, we'll talk about it, the patients and I, and we'll determine, is it a good enough alternative to get to where we need to go? There are those times when there is no good alternative, and I will just say to folks, how important is it for you to invest in your health and well-being? And if a certain test or a certain drug is not covered, then it's an investment, and it's important to get that mindset that this is an investment in my health and well-being.
Yeah. And there's also that aspect of saying to the client, okay, so we need to explore all of the alternatives. And I think that's something where people don't necessarily get that encouragement in their MD or DO's office. So you and I are going to get into that a little bit later. Okay, so you shared a really interesting statistic earlier about how quality of care is measured for allopaths, specifically in how it's determined whether or not you're providing good care. I want to kind of come back to this idea of like the percentage of tests being the driving factor in determining what's good care. So what I'm hearing in that is that you're considered to be giving good care as an allopath if you have X percentage of patients who are completing this test. Mm-hmm. Okay. Is that accurate? Is that?
To an extent, yes. It's a lot of what allopathic physicians and practitioners get graded on now.
Okay, so just kind of want to clarify this for the listeners. That would mean then that your performance is based on a number set by the boards, the insurance companies, the powers that be on what is going to constitute good care.
Right.
Okay. And that's just a percentage of these tests that, yes, they're necessary tests to help prevent things and so on. So the devil's advocate in me wants to know, how is that good care on a singular patient basis? What does that look like for the individual patient?
So what I tell my patients is that I make them aware that there are these benchmarks that we're looking to meet. And I make my patients aware of the following. So if it's the cancer screenings, early detection saves lives. Mm-hmm. And your life might be the life that is saved if you get your mammogram or you get your colonoscopy. So that's how I can funnel it down to be for individual patients. hemoglobin A1C of less than or equal to 8, or flipping that coin, if you're greater than 8%, you have a much higher risk of the complications. And so just all of the pathies that go along with diabetic complications that they're devastating. They range anywhere from being uncomfortable and inconvenient to life and limb threatening. And with blood pressure monitoring, that if blood pressures run higher than 140/90, and those are actually outdated numbers even, is that the standard now is to try to target 120/80 or lower. Yeah.
Okay, so again, devil's advocate.
Uh-huh.
How does that play in when someone's baseline numbers don't fit into those parameters, and how does that affect that percentage for you?
So if you've got somebody whose numbers don't fit into that, they're considered to be the outliers, and then the goal is to treat the numbers. Okay. So, but bearing in mind that to bring one's hemoglobin A1C to below 8, to bring one's blood pressure below 140/90, I'm sure you've heard the term described with hypertension as it's the silent killer. Mm-hmm. Is that your blood pressure doesn't have to be sky high for it to do its damage. The very, very high spikes, the spikes and the drops and the spikes and the drops, yes, that's not safe. But chronically elevated blood pressure, even in the 150/90 range, does damage to the vasculature.
Okay.
So that's why having these benchmarks and knowing what the numbers are that we are seeking to achieve, and I'm talking specifically about things like the hemoglobin A1C and the blood pressure, there's a lot of there's the evidence-based science behind it that achieving those targets decreases complications and can actually save lives. So, and then again with the cancer screenings, early detect. I'll never forget, I had a conversation, it's probably about 10 years ago already. I had two ladies who came in toward the end of the year. It was right around the holidays or so. And they hadn't gotten their mammograms. And they were fussing at me because, it's the holidays. I don't know when I'm getting around to get this done. And I said to both of them, early detection saves lives. I said, it might be your life that gets saved by completing the screening. And you got to be careful what you say sometimes, because right after the first of the year, both of these ladies were diagnosed with breast cancer. The good news for both of them, so this was probably close to 10 years ago. The good news for them is that they received their treatment. They went into remission. They are cancer-free 10 years later.
Excellent. In the Did You Know today, I shared the average time it takes a physician to interrupt a new patient during that history-taking portion of the appointment. Can you talk to us about what is that history-taking portion and why is it so important? What's it mean for care when a patient is interrupted that early in the process?
So the history-taking portion of an exam, whether it's a new patient or an established patient, that is basically the crux of what is going to arrive at the diagnosis. 80 to 85% of diagnoses are made through the history taking. So it's very, very important to get a good history. Depending on what the presenting complaint is, if you've got somebody who's coming in with a new presenting complaint, something that has not been evaluated before, for a practitioner, whether it be a physician or nurse practitioner, what have you, to interrupt, as you mentioned, the average time is 20 seconds. To interrupt as that is taking place, there's going to be so much information that's going to be sacrificed. I actually have templates that I use. For example, if somebody comes in with any kind of an extremity symptom, back pain, abdominal pain, is that I have a whole template that I go through. What's the word I'm looking for? Called old carts. It's onset, location, description. Carts is constant. Carts is associated symptoms, what provides relief, what provides exacerbation, any kind of treatments taken on. So I go through that. And for the most part, even if I have a patient who is expanding upon that, I let them do that, because just because I have my template doesn't mean that it's going to get all of the pertinent information for this particular patient for this particular problem. So in my own practice, I'm very, very mindful not to interrupt as my patients are giving me their history. So, but if I can get their history in a succinct manner, all the better. And then usually at the end, I will ask, is there more that you can tell me about your symptoms that you have not already told me?
Okay. You are not your average bear, as they say.
No, I'm not.
You practice just a little bit differently from a lot of your colleagues.
Right.
If I'm understanding that correctly. Okay. Follow up on that a little bit later, but I want people to understand, especially because the purpose of this series is to encourage collaboration. Not only are you a family physician and all of those other things on your CV, you're also a member of my team. I think it's important for people to understand that the averages that we see with allopaths out there are not exclusively true. I'm really grateful that you took the time to come in and you're sitting with us today and to talk about that. We have to take a quick break soon, but before we do, tell the listeners what your favorite part of your practice is, why, and what the benefits of that particular part of your practice are to the patients.
So my absolute favorite part of my practice is the patient interaction, as that's true for most practitioners. For me, not only seeing people, finding out what's going on in their lives, just I always open up every visit with, so what's new and exciting? How's the family? How's the this? Then we get into the symptoms. And as they're giving me their history, and as I'm already kind of starting to, integrate and synthesize some of the information, and I'm doing this as I'm reflecting what they've said, is that sometimes I'll say something and I will say, so if I'm hearing this correctly, you have said A, B, and C. What's great about that is that patients feel heard, is that if I'm reflecting it back and I have reflected it back accurately, yes, the doctor has heard me correctly. So that's one part that is just one of my favorite parts. And then it's the teamwork. You've heard the expression that the teamwork makes the dream work.
Yeah.
Is that when the patients and I can truly work together as a team, really be partners in the care. Amongst the things that actually has always driven me the most nuts is the patient that will sit there and say, when I'm putting together a plan of care, well, you're the doctor. That's nice. I'm the doctor. It's your body. It's at the center of this discussion here. And I really encourage people to really take responsibility for not just their bodies, but for the decision making that goes into taking care of their bodies. And it's an empowerment tool.
That's awesome. And that is a perfect segue to what we're going to be talking about when we come back from the break. We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, Dr. Schor and I are going to discuss the perceptions of each other's respective fields, compare and contrast the two disciplines, and then talk about collaborative care. So grab your favorite cup of brew and meet us back here in the parlor. We'll be right back. You're listening to Tea Time with Dr. Danni, conversations for navigating holistic medicine and wellness. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after the break. Today's episode is sponsored by the upcoming collaborative retreat hosted by Dr. Harriet Lemberger Schor and myself on May 3rd, 2025 at the classroom located at 755 Boardman Canfield Road, Suite C2, bottom floor, in Boardman, Ohio, from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. This retreat will introduce you to the different aspects of collaborative care with breakout sessions on lifestyle medicine and vision setting, naturopathic medicine and nutrition, emotional healing and rebalancing, and the transcendence therapy, followed by activities and a cooking demo. A light breakfast will be provided, as well as lunch following the cooking demonstration. The cost for this retreat is just $65. Registration is open now, but seating is limited. Registration closes on April 25th. Call 330-758-9567 or text Collab Retreat to 234-308-8289 to reserve your seat today. Do you suffer from anxiety or depression? Are you looking for a natural approach to healing and overcoming challenges that come along with those conditions? Dr. Danni can help. As a board-certified naturopathic doctor, her client-centered approach will help you discover the underlying contributors to your symptoms, learn how to better support your body, and provide you with resources to help speed your healing. Schedule an assessment or ask for the free 10-minute Can You Help Me consult to find out how Dr. Danni can help you. Call 330-758-9567 to schedule today. Life can be full of challenges. Sometimes they can be overwhelming, leaving you feeling lost or unsure what to do next. They can even batter your self-confidence. Let Reverend Joe Thornton help you. He's a certified holistic life coach and can help steer you in the right direction and to the answers that you need. Joe will work with you in one-on-one sessions, whether you're feeling anxious about the world or looking for a career change, dealing with relationship issues, or just the day-to-day challenges we all face. Don't let yourself feel overwhelmed and unsure. Joe can help you identify challenges that may be blocking your progress to the life and happiness that you desire. He's helped many people overcome their hurdles. Let him help you too. Go to www.greatconjunction.org for more information and to schedule your appointment. It's time to be happy. You're listening to Tea Time with Dr. Danni. This show was previously recorded. You can reach the show at drdanninaturopath@gmail.com. That's DRDANNI naturopath@gmail.com, or find the link in the show notes below. Now back to Tea Time. Here's Dr. Danni. Welcome back to all you tea timers. Before the break, our guest, Dr. Harriet Lemberger Schor, and I were discussing the changes she's seen in allopathic practice over the last 35 years of her career, why it's important to tell your story to your physician, and how that affects care. And we also talked about some of the benchmarks that are used in allopathy to determine quality of care. Dr. Schor, you, as I said before, are not your average bear in your field. Talk to me about what made you decide that you didn't want to be the average allopath. What were the things that you saw that you said, that's just not how I want to practice?
Over the years, and this was a concept that was taught in medical school, but as physicians get busy, their practices grow and grow and grow. The history-taking part of the visit is so critical, but it's more than just taking the history about the symptoms. It's talking to the patients about, how are you? How's the family? How's your job doing? How are the kids? Is that I have found that I gain a lot of information just from what may seem to be initial opening conversation.
Right.
Probably, I would have to say that probably 60 to 70% of the patients that I see throughout my day, many of whom there's an anxiety or a depression component. And even if that's not what they're coming in for, one of the things that we do screen every patient for at least once a year is depression. And it's shocking how many people have a positive screen just when they talk to my medical assistant, because that's who usually gathers the screen. But then as I start talking to folks and I see that their screen came up negative, I'm going to repeat this if you don't mind. And I ask the questions in just a little bit different way. Lo and behold, we have a very positive screen because they didn't want to talk about something with the assistant, or it just has become like their normal way of life, so to speak, that once the awareness that this is probably really contributing to how you're feeling about X, Y, and Z. So when I bring that to the attention of my patients is that because there's two different screening for one for anxiety, one for depression. And once we kind of hit on that, something else that I've noticed in my practice is that folks who are experiencing anxiety and depression who may not outwardly say I'm anxious or depressed, they're manifesting it in other symptoms. So I remember specifically one gal who was having this terrible, terrible, terrible abdominal pain. We put her through all kinds of testing to try to see if there was a structural issue. Everything came back negative, including endoscopy and colonoscopy. So I then pressed into the anxiety and depression part of it, and I realized that there seemed to be a connection. So this is the collaborative part of my practice, is that I explained, so this is the treatment that I would recommend. Here are your benefits. Here are your risks. Here are your alternatives. This is what I would recommend based on the evidence out there. What are your thoughts? And most of the time the patients have resonated with, okay, the benefits outweigh the risk. They'll give it a try. So I had this lady with the abdominal pain. I put her on an antidepressant, followed her up in 4 weeks, and the symptoms apparently were gone in 4 days.
Interesting.
So it's very important for me to get some of the background information that may or may not be specific to the symptoms, get into what they're experience with the symptoms are. Oftentimes getting into the psychological aspect of their care. Because again, the overwhelming majority of my patients, many of their symptoms are manifestations of something like either anxiety or depression.
Yeah, the emotional undercurrent, which gets so little attention in allopathic medicine. I even within like the psychiatric community, the connection between the body and the emotions or the spirit it gets overlooked. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Okay. Awesome. You mentioned there about your patient not wanting to talk to the medical assistant about it, which brought to the forefront for me how important it is to have trust with the members on your care team, right? So as people are starting to put together their health and wellness team and they're selecting who those members of that team are going to be, trust is a big deal, and so to have the opportunity, or to take the opportunity rather, right? All of your colleagues have the opportunity. It's just a matter of taking it, to sit down with that patient and go back and say, okay, let's revisit this and let's dig into this a little bit more. That's awesome. Now, I think that also segues back into what we were talking about before the break about empowering your patient. So talk to me about how that kind of dynamic, that trust and give and take conversation dynamic helps to empower your patients.
Everybody wants to be heard. And even for the patients who come in and feel that their voice is not as relevant as what my voice is going to be, I explain to people, because I have a lot of people who will hold back on their history, and I will educate them. If you don't tell me more, I can't get the full picture of what's going on so that we can collaborate, get this figured out, and get it treated. So a lot of my history taking, I've been able to really tweak and fine tune my history taking really in the last 3 or so years. And the reason for that, when I became a certified life coach, there is a technique of asking evocative questions that has the patient telling you, the patient or the client, tell me more. They're what-based questions, not why-based questions. So the more that I can get the patient to tell me through evocative questioning, the more information I'm going to get. And it becomes easier then to put all the information together to pin down a diagnosis and start the treatment.
Right. Yeah. I've said so many times that people will tell you their story. They'll tell you what's going on with them, and they'll tell you what they need if you just let them tell their story.
Yes.
So I want to continue this conversation about patient empowerment. On the last episode on naturopathic care, I talked about what this looked like in a naturopathic practice. Mm-hmm. Things like accountability, right? Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier about the patient being responsible for their own care. Mm-hmm. So kind of putting the patient back in the driver's seat is how I like to put it. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about some of the other things that go on in your practice that produce empowerment for your patients. What's that look like in your particular practice?
So starting at kind of the beginning of a process, if I have a patient coming in with a new problem or an exacerbation of an old problem, gather the history. And I know we're going to talk a little bit later about lifestyle medicine, which is very, very key and very critical to a lot of chronic care. It's touched upon by many of my colleagues, is that they know that they need to ask about, are you taking in too much fat and cholesterol? Are you taking in too much salt? But it goes deeper than that. And in fact, I have a template that takes a comprehensive lifestyle history. So it starts with getting that information. And as I mentioned in a previous segment, talking about, okay, now that we've formed a differential diagnosis based on what you've told me, and I may have come up with on physical exam, this could be A, this could be B, this could be C. Here are the recommended testing, benefits of testing, risks of testing, alternatives to testing. My recommendation is, what are your thoughts about this? By immediately taking it back to the patient, what are your thoughts based on a lot of information that I've provided to you, that empowers them to decide, is a form of testing going to really be the most beneficial thing for them. And then that can also apply to treatment. It just empowering the patients to making the decision. And I say this to pretty much everybody. I'm here to educate you. I'm here to gather information. I am here to provide your alternatives and to provide recommendations. But at the end of the day, the decision of what to do with this is yours. So there's the accountability factor there. Then taking this into a follow-up, and I always schedule follow-up appointments for my patients, is that especially if we've got a new or a changed plan of care, we have to touch base 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 months. We have to close the loop. And the assumption that I'm going to make is that if they have agreed that they're going to follow a certain plan of care, then my assumption is that they followed the plan of care. I don't know if you see this in your practice much, but it's not uncommon to have people come back, well, I didn't take the medication, or I never went and got the tests. Well, we're right back at square one.
I don't know that I necessarily see it to that extent. The big difference between how your care plan works with your patients and how mine does is that mine very much depends upon the patient putting in the work into establishing new habits, right? So for me, it's maybe not so much, well, I didn't take this or I didn't go do this, but it's more, well, I wasn't real consistent with it and then I just stopped because I wasn't doing it, right? This idea of kind of giving up before you've hit that breakthrough. But I do see how that parallels with, well, you didn't follow the instructions.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I mentioned in our first episode, I mentioned how people take this approach to their healthcare of just picking and choosing what directions they're going to follow. And I made the baking analogy with that. If I give you a recipe for a cake and you only follow half of the instructions, what kind of results do you think you're going to get? Mm-hmm. Right? It's a no-brainer. That's going to be a pretty crappy cake.
Yeah.
And we see that in our healthcare as well. And I think that applies not only to naturopathic approach, which tends to be a bit more labor intensive on the part of the patient, but also from the allopathic approach where they're like, I'm just not going to do this. And rather than communicating why they're not going to do it or what they're uncomfortable with, those conversations are never had. They just don't do it. And then it becomes frustrating on both sides of it. I know I've probably frustrated you a few times with my conversations about why I was uncomfortable with something. Mm-hmm. The beauty of that interaction, at least for me, is that when I express what my concerns are, your response is not, well, tough, do it anyway. This is all I've got for you. And I've heard that from other allopaths. Instead, it's, okay, look, I get where you're coming from. These are my thoughts and why I'm recommending this, right? There's a back and forth discussion on why you're recommending it and what you think the outcome is going to be from that. And then at the same time, you're listening to what my concerns are, right? If I don't want to do this procedure because I'm worried about X, Y, Z, mm-hmm. You're like, all right, well, let's talk through that. Let's get all the information. Maybe you're missing a little bit of something. Let's bring in another team member and talk about that. So that's incredibly empowering, that aspect of how you deal, and I get that's my experience, but that's something that was very important to me in saying, yes, this is definitely somebody who needs to be on my team. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just wanted to make one more comment
Sure.
about empowerment.
Yeah.
You're familiar with SMART goals, correct?
Yes.
When I got my board certification with lifestyle medicine, and I get a lifestyle medicine history, and I can see that there are diversions, I guess is a nice way to put it.
What do you mean by diversions?
Oh, are you following a healthy diet or a not healthy diet? Not healthy diet. How many times a week are you exercising? And this has been particularly fruitful during the Medicare annual wellness visits, which Medicare has almost mandated that their recipients get once a year. It's like a physical exam for Medicare recipient, and Medicare covers 100% of it. So in my opinion, there's no excuse for people to not be getting their annual wellness visits. But if we go through, and the questions are very thoughtful, but if I have somebody who's telling me, I'm pretty much eating what I want, I eat my sweets or I eat my snack foods, I'll ask, is there any aspect of your lifestyle that you feel you could improve upon? And it's usually either diet or exercise.
Right.
So which one do you want to work on? And some people will say exercise. And exercise is very, very easy to measure. So I'll reiterate what they've told me about their level of activity, and then we start going through a SMART goal. And I tell the patients, I am simply your secretary. I said, I will prompt you with each letter of the acronym, but it's your plan to create.
So for our clients or our listeners who don't know what SMART goals are, can you explain that to them?
Yes. So SMART goal is an acronym. S is for specific, M is for measurable, A is for achievable, R is for relevant, and T is for time bound. So, and I try to establish, even before we do the specific, measurable, time bound part, for somebody who, for example, is going to try to increase their exercise. They want to start walking. So is walking in and of itself an achievable goal for you? Yes. Is it relevant to the healthcare goals that you want to achieve? Yes. Then I'll circle back around. All right. So you want to walk. How many minutes a day? How many miles a day? How many days a week? What kind of intensity? There's your specific and your measurable part of it. And then the next question is, so by when will you start? And then that covers all the aspects of the SMART goal. My patients have created those. I may give suggestion or guidance, but it's not, at the end of the day, it is not my goal to create.
Right. Excellent. So that also ties into what we talked about in our very first episode about having someone on your team, and how important it is to set goals, but those goals should be set together, right? Like the individual needs to be setting those goals with their team members.
Documenting them.
Not only documenting them, but kind of coaching them through it,
yes.
Right? Like so along with those goals that you're setting, something that I would do is to have a follow-up with them where we look at benchmarks, right? Nobody does this perfectly. You're not going to be walking. If the goal is a mile a day and you haven't walked, like really walked in, 10 years, are you going to get that mile in the first time out? Probably not. Right. But if you get up and you show up and you walk a quarter of a mile that first day and you walk a third of a mile the second day and so on, like what are the benchmarks, right? So we're looking not for perfection, but for progress. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important in that. And it sounds like that is part of your process as well. Am I hearing that wrong?
Yeah, you've heard that right. But I'll have the patients kind of set what's realistic, what's really realistic from the get-go. Mm. So if I have somebody who has not exercised at all and they want to start a walking program, rather than distance, I tend to encourage time.
Right.
Because I think that time, number one, is a little bit easier to measure. And I think it's less intimidating than saying, I'm going to walk a mile a day, or right. 2 miles a day. Let me walk 10 minutes twice a day.
Right.
I think that people are less intimidated by that as a goal. So, and I ask, I said, do you want to break this down by either time or distance? It's much easier for people to do it by time.
And that's a great point. Just changing the parameters of the goal. We're still accomplishing the same thing, but the focus is different.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the focus has got to be, and this is where you get your A, achievable, and your R, which is relevant. Because if there are aspects of the goal that just do not seem to be relevant, folks are not going to follow through with it.
Yeah. There may be some different organizations out there giving the SMART goals. For me, the R is resonate or resonance, right? It has to resonate for the person. For something to resonate, it has to have a deep and personal meaning for you. It has to mean enough to that person for them to take action.
Yes.
Yeah, that was great. So for our listeners on YouTube, leave your thoughts and feedback on this particular segment in the comments below, and we will start a conversation. Now, Dr. Schor, you and I have discussed collaboration so many times. Interdiscipline collaboration has been something that has been a huge goal for me my entire career. There are things that as a naturopath, I don't have access to. And to be able to work with other disciplines and creating a team that is quite literally in the business of helping that patient reach their specific goals. That's something I've been working towards my entire career. I don't feel like that's been very successful up to this point. But hopefully with our agreement to collaborate, that changes, and for the betterment of our patients all around. So Share with me a little bit about what that collaboration looks like for you. You talk about what it means for you and what it looks like for you to collaborate with another discipline.
Okay, so depending on where the patient is coming from, many patients will come at it strictly from an allopathic standpoint, and then I kind of inject the more lifestyle flavor into this. I also have many patients that come at it from an alternative standpoint, naturopathy, chiropractic. Osteopathic is basically the same as allopathic anymore. So when I have patients that are coming to me from those perspectives, it's even more important for me to not only get a good history, but to really listen to the patient and hear what the patient is telling me. Also, to bring in the recommendations that have been set forth by their practitioner is, as you mentioned, if you don't have access to running certain tests, then that's where I am being brought into the fold. So, but I have got to secure the history to make sure that we're all on the same page with respect to what appropriate and targeted testing / treatment is going to look like. So for the most part, I have very good collaboration. It's not unusual for me to be collaborating with chiropractors.
And that's very much for me what collaborative care is about. That, you know, we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and so being able to bounce those ideas off of each other is really important in patient care, because we all have different strengths and weaknesses. We also have different perspectives on things, and we also have this ability to take what we've learned, right? Our education and our experience influences how we're viewing what's going on with the patient, and having someone else come in and look at this and say, well, have you thought of this? What if we looked at that? I think that's really important all around, right? So not only is that important for us as naturopaths, but also
as
for
a team.
As a team, but you know, for allopaths, for a chiropractor to say, hey, look, you know, this is what I'm noticing. And even if they are responding, what if the response is just not, like, we're not quite reaching the goal that the patient wants? What else do we need to do to help this person? What are your thoughts on that?
I agree 100%. I mean, we do this allopathic to allopathic practitioners and providers all the time. If I've got somebody with clear signs and symptoms of heart disease, I've sent them for a stress test. The stress test is highly suggestive that there's ischemia or blood flow compromise and what have you. They're going to the cardiologist, because much of what they're going to continue to evaluate and or treat and manage, it's past the scope of what I can comfortably do or what I may be willing comfortably to do.
Right.
We do that all the time with making referrals. It's less, unfortunately, it's less common between complementary and alternative forms of medical care and the allopathic medical care.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of that is this perception that naturopathic care, chiropractic care, you know, any of these so-called alternatives are that. They're alternatives. Mm-hmm. We're not. We're complementary. Mm-hmm. We're not the alternative to, but are additional options of care.
So it's more complementary.
Yeah.
You know, and again, and a lot of it depends on the specialty. I, in my honest opinion, I perceive naturopathy and homeopathy as complementary to allopathic care or to chiropractic or what have you. I see chiropractic more as alternative. Because many of my patients will see chiropractors and they will see them as an alternative to seeing me.
Okay, so I can see where that would look, where this idea of alternative comes in. So I think that is very much perception, and maybe that is a perception that needs to be cleared up for the public too, right? Like, there is no alternative. It's just different specialties within care that produce a good team for you, right? We talked about in the first episode about who you need on your team. A chiropractor was one of those. And because there are things that chiropractors address that often don't get addressed in allopathic medicine, right? The connection between a musculoskeletal misalignment and a symptom that might be occurring. maybe that's not the full cause, but it is part of the cause, right? We see the same thing within naturopathic medicine where, maybe we're finding something that's subclinical. It's not showing up on any of your testing, but the symptoms are there. We know it's part of the problem. And when we test with biofeedback, it shows up, but it doesn't show up in any of the lab testing. And that gets super frustrating for the physicians. It gets super frustrating for the patients, right? They're like, you just have no answers. Nobody knows what's going on. But we find that and we're like, okay, look, so we found this. Here's what we need to do to support that. Challenge in collaboration, I think, between, at least from my perspective, between allopathic medicine and naturopathic medicine has been that because most allopaths view us as alternative meaning, oh, they're going to take my business, right? They're going to see them instead, is that, when the patient comes back to them and says, hey, I saw my naturopath and we found this, they're like, no, your labs are fine. Right. Like they completely dismiss it.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that is true, is that you'll have many practitioners, and particularly in allopathy, who are not dialed into the importance of the other specialties. One thought that came to me as you were describing this, and this is a part of a journey that I'm taking with my own, not only personal growth and development, but the growth and development of my professional approach to patients, is that in allopathy, we rarely pay attention to a spiritual aspect. Mm-hmm. You and I were talking a little bit earlier about the 7 chakras. Yeah. I'd be willing to bet that the vast majority of my colleagues wouldn't know a chakra from a, whatever.
Right. Or the perception of that is, oh yeah, that's that woo-woo stuff. Mm-hmm.
Right? The more that I have gotten into it from a personal standpoint, the more I understand that this should absolutely not be ignored and truthfully should be addressed. The big problem in allopathy is that we have zero training in it.
Yeah, because that has primarily been the field, and still, I think still is. Right? Like this is still where the specialty within Ayurvedic medicine comes in, is that it looks at all of those aspects. And that's where the chakra stuff comes from. Mm-hmm. And same thing with traditional Chinese medicine, where, oh yeah, there's some stuff that we can take from that, but it's really not.
The other challenge with that is that in an effort to address energies, the patients have to be really bought in to doing the work.
Yes. And I think that's true of anything emotional. When we talk about the whole mind, body, spirit connection, mm-hmm. That's very true, especially when we're doing emotional work. Mm-hmm. I have clients that come in and we're doing, emotional cognitive therapies, and it is very much, it's heavy, deep, dark work. And yes. It is, not only is it emotionally challenging, it's physically exhausting sometimes. Yes. For the patients. I have people who come in for this kind of work to do that, to start getting into that emotional aspect of things. And I tell them, make sure you have nothing else to do for the rest of the day, because this stuff gets really heavy and it does physically drain you. You're going to be tired. You're probably going to be a little emotional for a couple of days, but you're doing the work. You're doing good work there.
Right. And that's another thing that, and I'm very interested in the point you just made. I just recently came off of a spiritual journey called the Journey to Vitality, where the topic was on the 7 chakras. And they had, the retreat leaders made sure that they gave all of us some integrative time, they called it. It wasn't as much as we would have liked, but, there was a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah.
But one of the things that they made it a point of telling us, when you guys go home, set aside integrative time. Even if you're going to jump right back into work, set aside time to integrate.
Yeah. So for my patients out there and anyone else who's listening, that integrative time, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Dr. Schor, is just time to process what you've learned, any epiphanies that have come up in this emotional work, so that you can understand where it's coming from, and then finish that process to the point where it really is integrated into your personality. And there's no real set timeline on when that happens.
Right. And the integrative process can be an active process. An example is journaling, or it could be a more passive process. For me, for example, part of my integrative time during one of the days was that I was out on the beach getting a little bit of sun, going into the ocean. But then when we resumed later that day, I felt complete because whatever I needed to integrate, it didn't have to come through hard work and journaling and this, that, and the other thing. It came through relaxation, restoration.
Yeah. I want to point out here, because you're mentioning like getting into the ocean. And so that for me is actually a physical integration, a physical activity that would do that. The water is so incredibly important to us, on a physiological level, but also on a spiritual level.
Yes.
And so, getting time in the water, especially the ocean water, man, I miss that, that's an incredibly great resource for helping to do that.
On my retreat, which I just got back from last week, we had a lot of water opportunities. One day we went floating down the mangroves, and the mangroves are water currents that they just flow.
Yeah.
And that is really a very, very important part of health and well-being, self-care, plus the waters. Water itself has healing properties, but the composition of the waters also have healing properties, based on their mineral content, their mineral balance, and whatever else. So something that I noticed, as you know, I had a total knee replacement 3 months ago. And I noticed that when I spent time in the water, whether it was in the mangroves, jumping into a cenote and being in this minerally balanced water, or in the ocean, I would come out and my knee is doing fine, but it felt much better upon having had that exposure to the water.
Yeah. That's incredible that you jumped into a cenote, like off a cliff into a cenote 3 months after having major knee surgery. Well done.
Thank you.
Well
Thank
done.
you.
We are unfortunately at the end of our time for today, but fear not, tea timers. Dr. Schor will be with us again on the next episode as we continue this conversation about why you need an allopath on your team. Stay tuned for a final word from our sponsors. Today's episode is sponsored by the upcoming collaborative retreat hosted by Dr. Harriet Lemberger Schor and myself on May 3rd, 2025 at the classroom located at 755 Boardman Canfield Road, Suite C2, bottom floor, in Boardman, Ohio, from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. This retreat will introduce you to the different aspects of collaborative care with breakout sessions on lifestyle medicine and vision setting, naturopathic medicine and nutrition, emotional healing and rebalancing, and the transcendence therapy, followed by activities and a cooking demo. A light breakfast will be provided, as well as lunch following the cooking demonstration. The cost for this retreat is just $65. Registration is open now, but seating is limited. Registration closes on April 25th. Call 330-758-9567 or text Collab Retreat to 234-308-8289 to reserve your seat today. Do you suffer from anxiety or depression? Are you looking for a natural approach to healing and overcoming challenges that come along with those conditions? Dr. Danni can help. As a board-certified naturopathic doctor, her client-centered approach will help you discover the underlying contributors to your symptoms, learn how to better support your body, and provide you with resources to help speed your healing. Schedule an assessment or ask for the free 10-minute Can You Help Me consult to find out how Dr. Danni can help you. Call 330-758-9567 to schedule today. Life can be full of challenges. Sometimes they can be overwhelming, leaving you feeling lost or unsure what to do next. They can even batter your self-confidence. Let Reverend Joe Thornton help you. He's a certified holistic life coach and can help steer you in the right direction and to the answers that you need. Joe will work with you in one-on-one sessions, whether you're feeling anxious about the world or looking for a career change, dealing with relationship issues, or just the day-to-day challenges we all face. Don't let yourself feel overwhelmed and unsure. Joe can help you identify challenges that may be blocking your progress to the life and happiness that you desire. He's helped many people overcome their hurdles. Let him help you too. Go to www.greatconjunction.org for more information and to schedule your appointment. It's time to be happy. That's it for today's show. Please join us back here in the parlor on April 17th for our next episode, where we will be continuing this conversation with Dr. Harriet Lemberger Schor on the importance of having an allopath on your team. You can get more information on me, Dr. Danielle McDuff, at www.drdannynaturopath.com, including upcoming workshops and speaking dates on the Education tab. You can also purchase swag and books at the website at www.drdannynaturopath.com/shop. Go to www.musslerchiropractic.com to book an appointment with me or any of our providers, or call 330-758-9567. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram under the handle at Phoenix Dr. Danni. That's PhoenixDrDanni. And join the Tea Time Facebook group at Tea Time with Dr. Danni on Facebook, or check the show notes for all the links and contact information. That's my time for today. Until next time, my lovelies, remember, be kind to each other and be kind to yourselves. Thanks for joining me on Tea Time with Dr. Danni, conversations for navigating holistic medicine and wellness. This show drops every other Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join us in the parlor for another episode of Tea Time with Dr. Danni in 2 weeks. And don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe to be the first to know when a new episode is available. The information and views expressed in this show are from a naturopathic viewpoint, and the content is educational information regarding the topic discussed. The underlying cause of any condition for any person may have some overlap with the information provided in this show, but will always be more nuanced than any bit of general information and require you to dig deeper with your team to discover the full cause for you as an individual. The information in this show is not intended to diagnose or treat any ailments.